my aim was to get as many women into AI as possible, because the more diversity there is, the better products we get. And I was very aware that there weren't many women in the field of AI. Unfortunately, I think it's changing anyway.
The world around us is changing faster than ever before. Ideas once only imagined in science fiction are becoming a reality. Throughout the course of our amazing 23-episode season, we'll speak to some of the greatest minds in robotics and artificial intelligence to discuss the groundbreaking work that's fueling it all. I'm your host, Ryan Marine. Join me and my co-host, Paul Mitchell, the president of the Indy Autonomous Challenge, and see why we call this the Inside Track. While the super-fast cars of the Indy Autonomous Challenge certainly make headlines, the ultimate goal of the IAC is to still find the best ways to practically apply that cutting-edge technology to our daily lives. This is the idea that Sarah Burnett wrote about in her recent book, The Autonomous Enterprise, Powered by AI. Sarah, our guest this week, is a renowned technology industry analyst and intelligent automation specialist, and the current chief technology evangelist at KYP.ai. She joins us to preach the AI gospel and explain how most industries are utilizing some form of it, even if they don't realize it. Even the classic customer service chatbot was fortified with AI during the pandemic to share rapidly changing health information updates via mobile app. Automation, Sarah says, is already changing the world for the better. So glad to have you here on the Inside Track, and I'd love to chat with you a little bit about that book and the AI role in industry as a whole. So let's start with the book, without giving too much away, of course, because we want folks to go out and pick it up and read it for themselves. But what is the general premise of what you put down on paper?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. The book is about, the premise of it is the autonomous enterprise, and that is an enterprise that does most of its work either automated or digitally anyway. In terms of technology, this is already possible. In fact, there are companies that I would categorize as autonomous in existence today. These are companies that you can deal with, and the processes that they go through to provide you a service or a product barely ever goes through a human, because they've got back office integration, they've got some robots doing some of the work. And in my role as an industry analyst working very closely with leading edge technologies, I can see that more and more organizations are heading that way. And the question is, what does that mean as we are on this journey of more and more enterprises becoming autonomous? What does that mean for the future of work? How will work be completed? What role will humans play? So I address a lot of these in the book. And then there's the bigger picture, because it's not just about automation. Firstly, because they've highly digitalized, they have an awful lot of data. And they can tap that data to innovate, to do things faster and better as well. And then, having become extremely innovative, they basically pull away from the pack. They are differentiated. There is this opportunity to mix and match technologies to create new things. So it's about a whole bigger world out there, world of opportunities. And I explore all of these in the book.
How and when did the premise of this book occur to you?
Well, for many years now, I've worked as an industry analyst, and in that role, I work with leading edge technologies, and I see what they're doing, what they're bringing. They're bringing new versions of their products, each better than the previous version, with more capabilities. And so it was very clear to me, it has been very clear to me for years now, that we are on this journey towards autonomous enterprises. And I wanted to, to speak about it and tell the story.
We'll talk more about the journey and where things are headed, but I do want to take a brief step backwards as well and learn a bit more about you, how you got interested in this topic. Was this something that you set out to learn more about actively, or is it something that you stumbled upon over the course of your work?
Well, so I've always been a sort of science and computer kind of person. I studied science at university, and then that allowed me to get into computing. And in many roles, I was working in some form of automation. And then later I moved into e-government, which was all about enabling, on the fly, real-time services provided by local authorities. One of my most recent roles as an industry analyst was setting up the intelligent automation practice for Evangelist Group, which is an industry analyst firm. And so one way or another, I got to know an awful lot about automation technologies. And now I have a portfolio of jobs, and one of them is being chief technology evangelist for a process intelligence company called KYP.ai.
You mentioned earlier that there are already some industries that are operating in some fashion as an autonomous enterprise. What are some of these early adopters, and what can we learn from their experience at the forefront, at the cutting edge, that might apply to other industries that maybe initially you wouldn't think that this could apply quite so readily?
Yeah, so I would say there are industries that are using it extensively, and the one that comes to mind the most is e-commerce. Of course, we're all used to ordering something, having it delivered very quickly. Behind the scenes, there's an awful lot of automation going on, from whether a robot picks something up from a shelf as you order that product and takes it to a station where it gets packed and dispatched, to all the back office functions like invoices and status of your order, these kinds of things being sent to you. And then for the company itself, behind the scenes, you'll find that they are checking stocks. They are then seeing if they need to order more of that product. So a huge amount of work is going on behind the scenes. And a lot of those processes are today automated, but it's sort of gone way beyond e-commerce. If you look at insurance companies, there are insurance companies that are now wholly automated. From the moment that you ask for a quote, your risks are assessed by AI, and then the offer is made, and then the onboarding process. The same with banking. In fact, a friend of mine opened a new bank account while on a taxi ride in a black cab in London. All he had to do was, take a picture of his passport photo ID, post it via the app, and then show himself on the camera. And, he was approved. So this is the pace of change. This is the pace of business today, enabled by automation, by AI. And, a few years ago, I talked to a South African bank that had changed its customer onboarding process from something that took 15 to 16 days to 15 to 16 minutes.
It's a really eye-opening example, actually. So when you're making the rounds as a public speaker like you do, when you can boil it down to someone in such simple terms, something so relatable to opening a bank account, we've all done that, to riding in a taxi, we've all done that. Does that help to demonstrate just how game-changing this technology, this marriage between automation and AI is going to be in the near future?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I go back to the point that I was making earlier. It's the combination of technologies. So before the pandemic, I visited a doctor's app provider, and you could have the app on your phone, and no matter where you were in the world, you could then arrange to have a consultation with a doctor. And behind the scenes, it was also capturing the knowledge from the symptoms to the treatment, and what worked, what didn't work, of course anonymized, without sort of damaging patient privacy. And of course the pandemic then made it a kind of go-to device. Otherwise, many of us would have never had any doctor's consultations in lockdown. So it was a huge help. And now it's quite commonplace. A lot of healthcare insurance companies offer it as an alternative to any other kind of arrangements that you might have. But back then it was really new. So, it was, again, this combination of technologies that enables that kind of innovation.
Yeah, to that end, automation is nothing new. I mean, you can go back to things like a water wheel, right? I mean, going back in history, automation has always been driving towards the future, and more in recent terms, something like manufacturing, where you can see automation. But it seems to me the game changer here is AI, and how all of a sudden automation becomes a reality for industries that previously you would have thought, well, this is always going to have human involvement. One thing I also found interesting is your focus on incorporating ethics at every step of the way in integrating AI and integrating autonomy into business as we look towards the future. And I bring that up because with autonomy, with automation, certainly in the manufacturing realm, we know how this had a trickle-down effect on changing people's lives, changing demographics of cities, things of this nature. How important is it to be thinking about the knock-on effects of integration of AI and of automation into these other industries to learn from the pitfalls of implementing automation at previous times in our past?
I think it's very important, and I do want to see governments getting together and putting some guardrails around, what can be done, what can't be done, how humans can be treated, and what shouldn't happen. But I'm really worried that we'll just jump into it. And I think we do need to think about the consequences of it and put some guardrails in place for that.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways we could go with this. And actually, kind of to your point just a moment ago, I'm curious, who bears the burden? Who bears the responsibility for setting those guardrails? Can business leaders be counted on to implement this the right way? Or does this need to have, as you say, some kind of government involvement? And then how do you standardize that if it is from the government side? It's very difficult to get international governments to agree on much of anything. So why can we expect that they would be able to agree on these guardrails here and implement them in a way that is universally for the best?
Well, they have come together, and governments have come together in other areas and made agreements, and I think that needs to happen. And I believe there is a AI safety conference, intergovernmental conference, planned to happen in London in the autumn. So I think it is going to happen, but I just wish they were a bit quicker. The government's always a bit slow to catch up.
Well, this is one of many conversations that stems from what you've written about trying to forecast the future. You say that you'd like to be a guide into this automated future. And reading that, it struck me how difficult of a task that would be. It makes me think of, say, Marco Polo, right? Leaving to go on his journey to China. He might have some notion about what's going to await him on the other side, but to truly be a guide, it's going to be quite difficult if you don't quite know what the destination is going to be. So what are the challenges that you've encountered as you try to forecast the future and help to nudge industry and government and the rest of us, for that matter, the consumer, in the right direction?
Well, that's a very good question. I really had to sit and think about what does it mean for the world? What does it mean for enterprises? And I was very lucky because through my work, I got to know how automation technologies worked and what they were capable of, and how AI works and what it's capable of. I had to do lots of interviews with enterprises. Some of them didn't want to be named, but I managed to get 4 really good case studies into the book.
Again, we don't want to give away too much because we want our audience to pick the book up and read it for themselves. But would you be willing to share at least one of the case studies, what you were able to glean from that, and then how that allowed you to think about the direction things are headed?
Yes, certainly. The one that I particularly like is about the deployment of a chatbot at a local government. And the reason I like it is because it started small. So it was to basically handle queries to do with one function. I think it was the sort of local taxes payments, where they got the most queries. And it was just so well done, because there are an awful lot of chatbots that we come across, don't we, when we're in contact centers, and they're completely useless. With this one, they had actually worked really closely with the contact center team. So the kind of questions, every type of question that they were likely to be asked, they had prepared for, and they'd prepared the chatbot for. So it wasn't that kind of dumb chatbot that fails after a couple of questions. It could actually cope with a lot. And then they ran it, tested it among themselves. They asked their partner organizations to test it, and they regularly check it and get feedback from their customers. And as things changed, particularly during the pandemic, when sometimes the government would, here in the UK, would announce changes to the way things had to be done because of the pandemic, literally changing things overnight, the staff could go and retrain that chatbot to be able to answer questions from the next day onwards.
Something that struck me in that response was your discussion about the chatbot. And everybody knows that first reaction to seeing the chatbot pop up on the screen, because you've tried to use it, it just can't do what a human can do. And that got me thinking, how important is it to implement new technology like this in a way that is capable immediately, so that we don't have this instant perception of ineptitude, like unfortunately I think follows the chatbot around? I mean, it would take me a little bit of time to be convinced that this chatbot can actually do the job, because we've all encountered so many that have struggled.
That's a really sad story, isn't it? Because it's the most visible part of AI, and then it's the one that's often so badly deployed, it gives everything a really bad name. But look at ChatGPT, that is effectively a chatbot, and look at how successful that is, and the number and variety of topics it can handle is just phenomenal. But within the context of business, you can train your chatbots to do a lot better than what we see, typically what we experience.
This podcast is associated with the Indy Autonomous Challenge. So our case study are these high-speed, AI-driven autonomous race cars. And what we have found is to have such a visible case study working on the edges of what is expected from autonomous driving technology. This is eye-opening for the general public to say, okay, well, I'm never going to need an autonomous car that can drive at 180 miles an hour side by side with another car. But if this technology can do that, imagine what it could do in a road car kind of scenario. So with that in mind, how important is it to have a high profile, like a ChatGPT, a high profile case study that can then sway the general public, grab their attention, show them what it's capable of?
I think it's incredibly important, because it engages an awful lot of people, and it also influences the opinion formers, and so it's also so easily accessible that almost makes it ubiquitous, because it's there, and people can use it whenever they wish to. Occasionally there's a queue to get in if you're not subscribing, but it's incredibly powerful tool at your fingertips. And it just shows you, because it's not just about automation in this case, because, it has some knowledge, but you have to know exactly what to ask it at the prompt to get into any deep level. But to get you started on something, it's brilliant. And I think it's all about helping productivity, people being able to do their work faster, people who are in the business of content creation. But, to draw on similarities between the Indy Autonomous Car Challenge and the rest of the world and all the business applications of AI, I think the lessons from the Autonomous Challenge is that AI working really fast in real time, capturing loads of information, processing and making decisions, shows us that it's possible for it to do more complicated things at work as well, in business as well. At the moment, there's a lot of very simplistic use of AI, but in future, I expect there'll be many more complex processes that are helped by AI as well.
Any examples of those that you might see implemented here in the short term?
I think one example is probably another case study in my book, which is it helping understand CT scan images. So actually understanding, in this case, the case study that I've done, it's about patients that present with strokes at a hospital here near me. What happens is that sometimes they present out of hours and there aren't specialists available. There are only emergency doctors. And with the help of AI, they can now actually diagnose the damage done to the brain much quicker. And they can actually engage a specialist remotely as well, because the solution that they've deployed not only helps diagnose what the damage is in the CT scan, it's actually then transmitting the image to handheld devices to the specialist. And the specialist can take over very quickly, even though they might be remote. And that was during the pandemic. That was a huge, huge bonus.
Yeah, really interesting and amazing what that could mean for the future of healthcare. Back to maybe your role when you're going out and you're speaking to business leaders, you almost have the role of an evangelist, right? Going out and preaching the gospel of automation and AI. And again, back to our example of the Indy Autonomous Challenge, especially in automotive, which and in motorsports, even more specifically, it is maybe an industry that is slow to adapt in some cases. There is a fraction of this segment of the population that is very rooted in the history of this and struggle to see what the benefits of something like this might be. But then they see it on the track. They see this example, this tangible example of what is possible, and it's eye-opening. So I'm curious about your experience going out and trying to convince business leaders who might be rooted in the way that has worked for decades, perhaps even longer, and proving to them, actually, yes, this has been successful, but times are changing, and this is why you need to be looking towards the future.
Yes, I think you have to present it in a way that resonates with the person you're presenting to. Otherwise, it'll just be incredible amount of skepticism. And I think you have to help them see the benefits of maybe running a trial, maybe a proof of concept, and seeing the benefits, and then building from there. I've spoken to some incredible business leaders who say they're not afraid of failure. So they trial new technologies, fail fast and learn from it. So my job is really to inspire decision makers to take those kinds of decisions.
One other element that you're involved in, and you seem to have your fingers in a lot of different pies, but I think this one's very interesting, the AI Accelerator Program. Can you tell us about it, how it functions, and who you're targeting with it?
Yes, unfortunately, I've had to put that on hold. So let me tell you the history of it.
Please.
I'm a member of the British Institute for IT, which is called BCS for short. And BCS Women is the women's group of that organization. And I became chair of it for a few years back in 2016-17. And I started the AI Accelerator then. And my aim was to get as many women into AI as possible, because the more diversity there is, the better products we get. And I was very aware that there weren't many women in the field of AI. Unfortunately, I think it's changing anyway. But so I started running these ad hoc events, basically grabbing any good speaker I could find and begging and borrowing facilities from big companies like, development systems. So we could run workshops and we could run seminars on, what is AI, on the science of it, about what education opportunities were available, and so on.
Well, we'll be on the lookout for that, that's for sure. But something you said really got me thinking there about this is AI, so it's an artificial intelligence, but ultimately it is a human-created artificial intelligence. So to your point about diversity, if it is only one segment of the population that is by and large writing this artificial intelligence, it's going to be lacking the well-roundedness that we would expect from artificial intelligence. Is that right?
Yes, so a lot of it is to do with the data that it is used to train it. So if it's not representative enough, because you can't use you need huge volumes of data, but it's got to be a representative sample of the user group that will end up using it in the future. For example, those banking apps that identify your picture from your video and match it to your, say, passport or ID card, could be far worse at recognizing women and matching them than men, because if they might have been trained on more men photos than women. So these are the kind of issues that we would end up with. And that's why I think we need diversity in the development teams.
Let's close with this then. Let's take a look into the future. You seem very bullish about what the implementation of this technology is going to mean for industry and for society as a whole. Where do you see the biggest benefit coming and affecting the most people in the next 5 to 10 years as we see an increased level of automation in the workplace, as we start to see the integration of the autonomous enterprise, as you call it?
Well, I don't think there'll be one thing. I think there'll be several things. One is that human augmentation that I was talking about, helping people do things faster and better and getting more satisfaction out of their jobs. I think that's definitely one of the benefits. The other is I'm starting to see developments that are to do with the environment and with sustainability. And my goodness, don't we need to do something about that? So that, it's increasingly now being used to manage energy consumption in heavy industries. It is being used to make sure that renewable energy sources run longer and provide more energy by just looking at weather patterns and being able to predict when they can be used. So I hope there'll be a lot of those kinds of AI for good uses as well. And I believe I'm seeing the beginning of that as well.
Sarah Burnett is the author of The Autonomous Enterprise Powered by AI. This has been a wide-ranging and fascinating conversation. We really appreciate your time and your insight.
Thank you for asking me. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us this week on The Inside Track. That was Sarah Burnett, renowned technology industry analyst and author of the book, The Autonomous Enterprise Powered by AI, sharing her insights into how soon we can expect advanced automation to be running more and more aspects of our daily lives. Next week, we'll continue exploring youth-focused tech when we speak with Andy Saba about his band of undergraduate engineering students actively going head-to-head with PhD teams in this year's Indie Autonomous Challenge. Thanks to the IEDC and the IAC for keeping us on the Inside Track.